Week 6 of the NFL season is here. We're starting the day with an early matchup between the Bears and the Jaguars overseas, and we got a full slate of NFL games throughout the day. And then a Monday night matchup between the Bills and the Jets. All kinds of injuries piling up. We've got bye weeks this week. We're getting ready for disappointment and excitement. So be sure to check your lineups last minute, and before you do so, here are 10 things you need to know heading into week 6 of the 2024 fantasy football season. Before we do so, let me remind you guys that Underdog is the place you want to be if you want to get in on additional fantasy football action all season long. Their week 6 NFL pick'ems are live, and Underdog is giving all new users who sign up with promo code TheCatch a free Joe Burrow over half of a total yard pick'em to use towards today's action. And on top of that, all new users who sign up with promo code TheCatch are going to receive a 50% deposit match up to $1,000. So that's a free pick'em to use towards today's action and up to $1,000 in bonus cash on Underdog when you sign up with promo code TheCatch. That link is down below. All right, the first thing you need to know is that Breece Hall is a must-start running back going into week 6. I have been talking about this throughout the whole week. I'm still getting questions about Breece Hall. Should I trade Breece Hall? Should I trade for Breece Hall? Should I sit Breece Hall? Should I be concerned about Breece Hall? Is Braylon Allen taking over this backfield? Are the Jets doomed? No, kind of. Maybe the Jets are doomed, but Breece Hall is not doomed. He's had 2 bad fantasy performances against 2 good run defenses. He's going to bounce back this week against a Bills run defense that is giving up the second most fantasy points to the running back position. Breece Hall is still averaging 14.3 fantasy points per game. He is in line for a solid fantasy outing on Monday Night Football at home against an awful Bills run defense. The Bills are good against the pass. They're awful against the run. We look back on the season, they've allowed a double-digit fantasy performance to James Conner, Devon Achane, Travis Etienne, Justice Hill, and Derrick Henry, Cam Akers, and Dare Ogunbowale. That is a double-digit fantasy performance in every single matchup of the season, and 2 matchups where 2 running backs have walked away with double-digit fantasy performances. So yes, if you're in need of points this week, you could consider Braylon Allen if you're desperate enough, but Breece Hall has to stay in your starting lineups. Don't be afraid of starting him. He's a must-start player on Monday Night Football here in Week 6. He's going to get back to what we expect out of Breece Hall. Don't bench him heading into the week. Next thing that you need to know is that Devin Singletary is out officially for the Giants. That's going to leave Tyrone Tracy as the starting running back for the Giants. And we saw Tyrone Tracy last week as a starting running back for the Giants. He walked away with 14 fantasy points on the road against the Seattle Seahawks, 18 touches for 129 yards on the ground, 7.17 yards per carry. Didn't really get involved in the receiving game, 2 targets, 1 reception. Maybe that changes this week. We shall find out. This is a better matchup this week on Sunday Night Football against the Bengals. This defense looks almost non-existent. I mean, they're not as bad as like some of these other teams like the Jaguars, for example, who are bottom 10 against every position in fantasy football, but they sure as heck feel like it. This Bengals defense has been getting shredded, and they've been awful against the run. Double digits in week 1 to Rhamondre Stevenson, double digits in week 2 to Isaiah Pacheco, double digits in week 3 to both Austin Eckler and Brian Robinson Jr., double digits in week 4 to Chuba Hubbard, then double digits last week to Derrick Henry. We want to start starting running backs against this Bengals defense, especially when they are on the road. And the Giants as a whole are playing very good defensively. They're not playing that bad offensively. Daniel Jones has actually been playing pretty decently, even with missing Malik Nabers in the past week. They've had guys like Darius Slayton step up. Rondell Robinson's been very good on the season. This is a competent offense. They're playing in a primetime game. This is a non-competent defense in the Bengals. If you were able to pick up Tyrone Tracy on the waiver wire, if he's been on your bench and he only sits at 46% rostered at the time I am recording this, if he is available, whatever it is, he is a very solid start going into week 6. The next thing you need to know is that the Philadelphia Eagles on the season have still given up the most fantasy points to the wide receiver position. And yes, I'm going to say that we should start Amari Cooper here in week 6. This is the last time I talk about a Browns wide receiver. I promise if Amari Cooper has a bad game. I liked Cooper last week. I liked Judy last week. Yes, this offense looks like a dumpster fire. Yes, Deshaun Watson looks like he doesn't even care about playing football. But Cooper has 8 or more targets in every game on the season, and this Eagles secondary is just awful. Cooper is still averaging 10.6 fantasy points per game. They are on the road here, but I think that the Browns will put together a good enough outing that Amari Cooper walks away with a solid fantasy performance and maybe gets close to that ceiling of 27.6 fantasy points that we saw in week 3 against the Giants. The targets have been there. The volume has been there. They're just bad targets because it's Deshaun Watson, but I'm going to leave him in starting lineups if I own Amari Cooper. The Eagles' pass defense, like I said, has been awful. They are averaging 1.8 receiving touchdowns allowed per game. So let's just go ahead and say they're allowing 2 receiving touchdowns per game. 2 touchdowns to Green Bay in week 1, 2 touchdowns to Atlanta in week 2, 1 touchdown in week 3 against the Saints, and 2 touchdowns in week 4 against Tampa Bay Buccaneers. This is an incredibly bad secondary in the Philadelphia Eagles. Amari Cooper, if you own him, is a solid start in week 6. Another solid start that I've been talking about throughout the week at wide receiver is Jalen Tolbert of the Dallas Cowboys, a player, if you watch last week's last minute waiver wire video, I told you guys to pick up, and then he became a popular waiver wire addition beginning of the week and a very popular waiver wire addition as the week has progressed. He's sitting at 49% rostered, though. He might be available in your league. He is definitely a player that we can slide into the flex with confidence. 21.7 fantasy points last week against the Steelers, the game-winning touchdown, all that good stuff. But he's also averaging 11.3 fantasy points per game so far on the season. It has scored double-digit fantasy points twice outside of last week on the season against the Saints and the Ravens. And the Lions' pass defense has been very bad. I mean, they've been a little bit better the past 2 games. We missed them in week 5 on their bye week, but overall, even if they have improved, they're still giving up the 27th most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers so far on the season, and they're averaging 276 passing yards allowed per game and at least 1 receiving touchdown allowed per game so far on the season. So this is a great spot for Jalen Tolbert because that defensive pressure that the Lions can apply is going to be focused on CeeDee Lamb. And don't forget, Jake Ferguson also in the mix, and Rico Dowdle has been very, very good in terms of a pass-catching running back in the last 2 weeks. So I think this is a smash spot for Jalen Tolbert. Like I said, still kind of lower roster percentage overall. So if you're able to pick up Tolbert, you're in need. He's a great spot play, but I think he's going to be very good as long as Brandon Cooks remains out and he's dealing with that knee infection. Could be a long time before Brandon Cooks is back. And maybe by the time Cooks is back, Tolbert has just solidified himself as the number 2 wide receiver on this team. So Tolbert, a great play against the Lions here in week 6. Tolbert's receiving line currently on Underdog is sitting at 45.5 total receiving yards. I would head over to Underdog and smash this line. He has hit that in 2 out of 5 games so far on the season and barely missed it in week 3 at 42 receiving yards. Like I said, I love this matchup for Jalen Tolbert. I think he can easily hit this line. And don't forget, new users who sign up on Underdog with promo code THECATCH get that free Joe Burrow pick 'em for the week. Take your free pick 'em, take the over on Jalen Tolbert's receiving yards, automatically triple your cash entry. And on top of that, Underdog is going to give you a 50% deposit match up to $1,000 when you sign up with promo code THECATCH. That link is down below. All right, the next thing that you need to know is that Spencer Rattler is starting for the New Orleans Saints at the quarterback position. And I do want to talk about this because I think a lot of people are kind of freaking out if they own Chris Olave or if they own Rhamondre Shaheed. But I want to give you guys a little bit of confidence that Shaheed and Olave don't become like automatic must-sit players. There's still some risk involved here. You never know what you're going to get with a rookie quarterback starting. But the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are allowing the second most fantasy points to the quarterback position. Now, some will argue that we just, based on last week and the huge performance that Kirk Cousins had, maybe this is a little bit skewed, and I think that's fair, but they still have been very poor against the quarterback position, and they've also been poor against the wide receiver position, coming in at the 23rd most fantasy points scored in terms, or fantasy points allowed by the wide receiver position, excuse me. So this is still a good spot. I don't want to get too excited here, but this is a home game for the Saints. So I don't think you need to go crazy. And I mean, Spencer Rattler probably already got picked up if you're in a double quarterback super flex league. He's okay as a stash. It's not really, the focus here isn't exactly Spencer Rattler. It's more the fact that I think Olave and Shaheed are still playable. I don't want you guys benching those two players for kind of like fringe waiver wire type players. Maybe if you have other studs and you don't want to risk it, that's fine. But this is still a good matchup for Spencer Rattler as well as Olave and Shaheed. We go back on the season so far. We've seen very good performances by quarterbacks against the Bucs. Jaden Daniels in week 1. Jared Goff, good enough in week 2. Not great, but good enough. Bo Nix in week 3. Very good. Jalen Hurts, good enough, not great. Maybe you could argue bad, but good enough. And then last week occurs Kirk O'Chain's a huge performance on Thursday Night Football. At the very least, there's still some hope that Spencer Rattler can come out and be a competent quarterback in this matchup against the Buccaneers, and there's definitely still hope. But there's a good enough matchup here for Chris Olave and Shaheed, so don't completely panic. If you own Olave or Shaheed, they are still startable in week 6, even if that ceiling is maybe a little bit lower. All right, let's talk about another young quarterback, and that is Caleb Williams, who I think is a fantastic start. I know this is an early game, and sometimes these overseas games get a little weird. Defense shows up, or maybe I should say offense doesn't show up when it's supposed to, and then sometimes defense doesn't show up when it's supposed to. So you never quite know what you're going to get. It's kind of a weird week for both teams, but I like Caleb Williams a lot. I like DeAndre Swift a lot. I think Roschon Johnson can get you points if you need some. I like DJ Moore this week. I think Rhamondre, Keenan Allen have some upside this week. And I do like Cole Kmet this week. And the main reason why I like everyone involved here is because this Jaguars defense as a whole, is just flat out awful. 30th against opposing wide receivers. DJ Moore has got to be a must-start player. 26 against the running back position. DeAndre Swift, a must-start player. Surprisingly, 18th against the tight end position. That's their best mark here, but we'll still start Cole Kmet. We don't have better options. And then in terms of the quarterback position, they are allowing the most fantasy points out of any team. So Caleb Williams sits at 67% rostered. If you need a stream, if he's available, smash start against the Jaguars this week. Everyone else involved here, great starts. Like I said, even guys like Rhamondre, Roschon Johnson have sneaky upside because this Jaguars defense as a whole might be the worst defense. I think pretty easily is the worst defense in the entire NFL. So if you're looking for points this week and you're a little bit limited, injuries, bye weeks, everything that's going on, if you have a Bears player, they are worth starting here in week 6. All right, we started the video off with Breece Hall as a must-start player, and guess what? Yes, Bijan Robinson is a must-start player here in week 6. Same deal as Breece Hall. Should I trade Bijan Robinson? What should I trade for Bijan Robinson? Should I bench Bijan Robinson? Are the Falcons ever going to use Bijan Robinson correctly? Should I pick up Tyler Algier? Now, I will say Bijan Robinson was dealing with a hamstring injury throughout the week, but he has been cleared, is good to go. He's going to play. Algier, I think, is a minor role here. We haven't seen the one fantasy performance in week 4 where he had 10 fantasy points. Outside of that, 7.5 or less in every matchup. He's getting, let's see if I have an average here. So he's had 33 total touches through 5 games. Do the math. 9 or less touches in every game so far on the season, not including receptions. So he's going to be somewhat involved. This is such a bad run defense that sure, Algier could find the end zone this weekend, but this is also such a bad run defense that there's no way you can consider benching Bijan Robinson. And if you were able to buy him low because everyone's panicking, you have to start him. You're in a great spot if you're able to trade for Bijan Robinson. And no, I know Bijan Robinson has not quite lived up to that first round expectation, but you're not trading him just yet. He's still averaging 13.5 fantasy points per game on the season. And this Panthers run defense, awful. Worst in the league. Through the first 5 games of the season, they've allowed 554 total rushing yards. That's 110.8 yards per game. And they have allowed 4 total touchdowns. So almost 1 touchdown per game, technically 0.8 touchdowns per game. So week 1, shredded by Alvin Kamara. Week 2, shredded by J.K. Dobbins. Week 3, Alexander Madison did some stuff. We'll just leave it at that. Week 4, good game out of Zach Moss and Chase Brown. And this past week, shredded by DeAndre Swift and Roschon Johnson. If you own Bijan Robinson, I've said it throughout the whole week, but I'm reminding you guys once again, before Sunday's games kick off, do not bench Bijan Robinson. And yes, you may have guessed it, but I love Bijan Robinson to score a touchdown this week. I would head straight to Underdog, smash his touchdown line. And as a reminder, all new users who sign up with promo code The Catch are going to get that free Joe Burrow pick 'em for the week. Take your free pick 'em. Take Bijan to score a touchdown. Automatically triple your cash entry. And while you are doing so, Underdog is going to give you a 50% deposit match up to $1,000 when you sign up with promo code The Catch. That link is down below. All right, next thing that you need to know is that we have another week without our guy, Malik Nabers. So everyone's talking about Darius Slayton, and I think Darius Slayton is a good start, but I've also seen people saying like Darius Slayton is a wide receiver 1 for the Giants this week. He's not. Randall Robinson is the wide receiver 1 for the Giants in a good matchup against the Bengals. Now, the Bengals have found a way to be top 12 against the wide receiver position, but it certainly doesn't feel like that. This defense, very, very poor. Randall Robinson, I think, is a must-start player this week. I do like Slayton. He's lower rostered at just 34% rostered. You need a last-minute plug-and-play, spot play. I've talked about Slayton throughout the week. He was, atop of the last-minute waiver wire additions video yesterday. I like Slayton. 26.2 fantasy points against Seattle, 11 targets, 8 receptions, 122 receiving yards, and a tutty last week. I do like Slayton, but Randall Robinson has been great on the entire season, not just one game with no Malik Nabers. He's been great on the entire season. 11.8 fantasy points in week 1, 9.8 in week 2, where he did score a touchdown, 13.1 in week 3, 18.1 in week 4, 16 in week 5, and he also scored a touchdown against Seattle last week. So Randall Robinson, much higher rostered at 79%, but if he is out there, you need a play. He's a fantastic play this week. And overall, Robinson, I think, should hold a little bit more value as he's averaging 13.8 fantasy points per game. Super safe floor, nice upside still. I do like Darius Slayton, but the guy that I'm targeting as a solid start this week with no Malik Nabers is Randall Robinson. And like we talked about earlier with the Giants, they're playing good football. Daniel Jones has not been playing that bad. This is a great matchup for Daniel Jones and the pass game of the Giants. It's a home game for the Giants. I'm all in on Robinson this week. And Darius Slayton is a nice flex option. He's a little bit lower rostered, while Malik Nabers is out here in week 6. The next thing that you need to know is that Rhamondre Stevenson is out this week, which means Antonio Gibson's actually going to be the starter for the Patriots this week. Unlike last week where Rhamondre Stevenson was quote-unquote benched and then not really benched, and Gibson was very, very limited in his action in that game. So what do we do with Antonio Gibson, who's a little bit lower rostered overall at 47% rostered, still a player that you can potentially pick up this morning and plug in if you need a spot play at running back or flex. He's averaging 7.5 fantasy points per game. He has 2 double-digit fantasy performances on the season in week 2 and 4. But for the most part, I guess kind of split here. In week 2, he was good on the ground. In week 4, it was mainly because of the receiving game and a big catch towards the end of that game against the Niners. 8.67 yards per carry last week off of 6 touches against Miami, though. He has shown some efficiency. 5 yards per carry in week 3 against the Jets, 8.73 yards per carry in week 2 against Seattle. So there's definitely some value here with Gibson. But it's a little bit of a tough matchup on paper as the Texans are 10th against the running back position in terms of fantasy points allowed. But then we look a little bit deeper on the season. 104 rushing yards allowed by the Texans in week 1, 71 allowed to Chicago in week 2, where they were kind of in that slump area, but they did allow a rushing touchdown in that game. 118 rushing yards allowed to Minnesota in week 3, 158 rushing yards allowed in week 4 against Jacksonville. And last week against Buffalo, 150 total rushing yards allowed. So they still haven't been great against the running back. They haven't been great as a run defense, I should say. But in terms of fantasy points allowed, they've been top 10. They've only allowed 2 total touchdowns to the running back position, which is a big factor when we're looking at fantasy points allowed. They still haven't been great necessarily against the run. So I do think that this is a good spot for Antonio Gibson. I don't know how high the upside is here, though, because Drake May is going to be the starting quarterback here. The offensive line still sucks, and they don't have great pass catchers. Maybe we get some upside because Drake May is starting. Maybe it's better than Jacoby Brissett. Time will only tell. So I do worry a little bit about Gibson, especially if the run game gets game scripted out here. But overall, if you need to spot play Antonio Gibson, when we really break down the numbers here for the Texans against running backs, it's not as bad as it may seem. So Gibson, a player you can certainly pick up and play, but there is risk here as we approach week 6. All right, last thing that I want you guys to know is that Mike Evans has a bad matchup today against the Saints and his arch nemesis, Marshawn Lattimore. So what do we do if we own Mike Evans? I'm leaning towards benching him. The Saints are giving up the 11th fewest fantasy points to the wide receiver position. Look back over the years with Mike Evans against the Saints. We have to go back to 2021 to find a game where he scored a touchdown. And in that game, just 4 targets, 2 receptions. Then we have to go back a little bit further to the first matchup in 2020 to find another touchdown. And in that game, 4 targets, 1 reception for 2 receiving yards, including that touchdown. We have to go back to 2019 to even find a game against the Saints where Evans has 8 targets, so more than 6 targets. To go back to 2019. Look at the screen. All of these matchups against the Saints are awful. Both matchups last year, literally 3 receptions. We look back all the way to 2020. He has had more than 3 grabs, 3 receptions in just 2 games. He has had more than 4 receptions in that time span. Literally, if we go back to 2018, he's had 4 or less catches in every game. Mike Evans does not play well against the Saints and does not play well against Marshawn Lattimore. Don't know what it is exactly, but when Mike Evans lines up against the Saints, it is not good. Earlier in the season, I kind of ignored the matchup against Pat Surtain for Mike Evans and fully regretted it. I'm not going to ignore the stats here or this matchup. Mike Evans is a sit for me this week unless you have nothing better. Let me know in the comment section down below if you own Mike Evans, what your roster looks like. But for a majority of you guys, I'm staying away from Mike Evans, who does average 16.1 fantasy points per game on the season, does have 5 receiving touchdowns. And I will say this as well. Overall, this is a bad matchup for the Buccaneers. Again, I mean, the Saints are good against the quarterback position, running back position, and the wide receiver position. So I'm worried a little bit about the Bucs on the road here against the Saints as a whole, but I am especially worried about my guy, Mike Evans. Let me know in the comments down below if you own Mike Evans, and we can go from there. I'll do it for today's video. There are 10 things you need to know before today's games kick off. Don't forget, guys, I'm answering every single fantasy football question on this video in the comment section down below. If you comment before the London games play, I may not be able to get back to you, but I will answer every question on this video before the afternoon games kick off. And don't forget, I will be streaming before the afternoon games kick off, answering any fantasy football questions as well. So if you guys need anything, join the stream or drop a comment on this video down below. And don't forget, we have everything that you could possibly need for week 6 here on the channel. We will have everything that you could need for week 7 as well. So make sure you guys are subscribed to the channel so that you don't miss out on any of the content. If you guys need anything else, make sure you go check out the videos for the week as well. With that, I'll say good luck today here in week 6. And thank you guys so much for watching and or listening. And remember, you saw it here on The Catch.